Hi guys, Sam from Everything PSP here. Today we have another channel commission, this time building a PSP for one of my subscribers, Blake. Now I've done this video in a bit more of a casual format, but I will still take you through the process. But basically we're going to be combining two broken PSPs with a few extra spare parts as well to create one new working one. So before I started the build, I spoke to Blake about what parts to get, and we made a bit of a list and we placed an order. But it took a little while for the parts to arrive, so I'm sorry it's been a bit longer than usual in getting the next video out. But anyway, you can see we're getting started with the process now. So the first thing to do is to inspect the two consoles that we're going to be using. This one I believe has a good motherboard but a bad screen. And this is the battery we're going to be using. There are Camera and Seno ones as well, but this is the one that I happen to have with me. So the buttons all seem to be working fine, and the console does power on, but as you can see the screen is really damaged. So we're going to take all the parts out of this PSP and use the screen from the other one in order to complete the build. So the first thing to do is to take out all of the screws, and you can see this one here has a sticker, but if you peel it back you can get access to that screw quite easily. The same goes for the rest of the screws on the body. Basically you just want to undo everything and then take the faceplate off. So just gently pry around the edges until it pops out. You might notice a bit of movie magic as the build goes on because I didn't get all the shots that I wanted on camera, and unfortunately some of the stuff that I had to do I couldn't do it behind the camera, so I had to take the PSP away for a minute. So I've tried to get as much footage together as I can, so hopefully this is still useful if you're looking at doing this yourself. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is remove the home bar. And the screen, I'd already removed it previously, but this is the faulty one. Sometimes I use a screwdriver to pull up the tabs, other times it's easier to just use your fingers. Just removing the thermal pads and putting them back on the motherboard. Just label this one so I don't get them mixed up later. And taking some more parts out, unscrewing basically everything. And the triggers have little guards as well that you need to unscrew. So next up is to remove the power supply switch. And now we're removing the power supply. Next is the speaker. And we're going to remove the ribbon cable that attaches the controls. This has a sticky backing, so try and be careful with it and don't let anything get stuck to it. And the Wi-Fi antenna, analog stick, D-pad controls. The L button is also stuck down to the top, so be careful. Now we're removing the trim surrounds. And undoing the remaining ribbon cables. Next is to remove the shielding. And now the motherboard can come out. This is the small retainer that holds the Umd Door spring. and this is the spring itself. You can also take out the shielding and remove the TV out socket. Flipping it over, we're going to begin removing the UMD door. There's two little rubber stoppers. Then you can just pry out the cage and you'll see a slot where you can remove it. The door does come out, but it requires some moderate force. And then we can unscrew the UMD drive from here. This bracket is a pain to remove, but it's good to transplant it onto the new build. There's also a small spring, and you can take the tops around as well. These little retainers hold the screws in the top. And now we can remove the Wi-Fi antenna. To do this, we have to peel back the sticker and then remove the antenna through the hole. It's stuck down with a small amount of adhesive, but you can pry it off. Now we're checking out the new shell. It's an Ostent one that I bought online. It's average quality, but we're going to be covering it up anyway, so I'm not too fussed. Now we're taking a look at the motherboard, trying to diagnose what's wrong with it. I tested the fuse for continuity here and I could see that it was an open circuit. However, as you'll see, when I tried to repair it using a soldering iron, I just didn't have the right equipment and I ended up damaging the board. This is salvageable and I will probably try and do another video at some point in the future of me fixing this, but for the sake of brevity I decided to just order another motherboard online and continue with the build while I waited for that part to arrive. Now I'm just laying out the components of the new shell. And we'll begin assembling the components by pushing in these retainers as well as the spring. Next is the bracket. And now the UMD drive can be put back in. Just be careful with the ribbon cables, make sure to poke them through so that you can connect them to the motherboard later on. Now we're screwing everything down. Don't over tighten them. The next thing to install is the Wi-Fi antenna, which we're going to stick onto the console. And in goes the cage for the UMD door. You'll notice this process is basically the reverse of what we've just done. With the UMD door back in place, we can assemble the brackets. Here we are inserting the rubber stoppers again. And next to go in is the UMD door spring. Now that the spring has been tested and is working correctly, we can install the spring retainer. Next to go in is the TV out. And we'll just screw that into place. Now we can put the shielding back on. And the next thing to do is to replace the surround with the OEM surround. Now you can see we've got our brand new motherboard. Apparently it's been tested, but I'm installing it blind. Of course, thanks to us being in the future, we know that this motherboard is working correctly, but at the time I was going blind. Now that we've connected up the motherboard to the ribbon cables, we can install the D-pad. As well as attach the Wi-Fi antenna. I've also installed the analog stick. And now we're going to install the other side of the controls. Again, pushing the ribbon cable in, making sure that it's seated nicely. And these are the aftermarket trigger buttons that I got, which have a really nice mirage effect, which I quite like. It's cool how the red only shows up when you look at it from a certain angle. Now we're reinstalling the power supply switch, as well as the power supply itself. And replacing the top surround with the original as well. The reason I use the original surrounds is that the quality is much higher, it gives the overall build a better feel, but it's also slightly stronger. And in particular with the power switch, the OEM ones seem to work really well, whereas in the aftermarket ones the switches don't really work that well. Now we're putting the rest of the surrounds on. Testing the feel of the switch and screwing everything down. Again, this is basically a reverse of the original process, and I did actually look back on some of the footage that I'd taken to help as a guide in reassembly. Now we're putting the trigger guards back on. Just be careful with the Wi-Fi antenna that you don't snag it when you do that step. Now we're just refixing the top surround there. And reinstalling the speaker. You'll see there's a small tab that you have to place the speaker underneath, and that will hold it in place. Now we're installing the custom joystick cap as chosen by Blake. And it did require a bit of force, but you have to tuck in the wires behind this little tab here, otherwise it might put pressure on the screen. Now the home bar goes in. And push down the tab on the connector. And just keep that out of the way. Now we're going to remove the good screen from the other donor console and install it by connecting the ribbon tabs and pressing it into place. Now one of the connectors ended up being broken, so I had to install the screen off camera, but it's fairly easy to do. Now we're just giving the screen a really good clean. lowering down the new faceplate. You'll notice the colour of the home bar buttons change in the next few shots, as I realised that we'd ordered the wrong ones, so we had to adapt from the originals, and ended up making a new custom look that actually fits the console quite well. Next is to install the main screws that hold the faceplate to the body. Be careful not to over torque these. Now the battery can go in, and the battery cover. Finally, install the last of the body screws, and quickly check the triggers are not bound up. If you over torque the back screws, the triggers can get stuck. And now installing the top screws and the bottom screw as well. So the final step is that we're going to install a custom vinyl. This was also ordered online, and you have to be careful about what model you choose because the cutouts will be slightly different. And this one actually did fit reasonably well. There are a couple of places where the stickers go slightly off the edge, but for the most part they fit extremely well. Now we're going to install the rear stickers, and unfortunately, because it's important to get these lined up properly, I couldn't do it on camera, but here you can see the final result. If you've seen some of my other videos, this won't come as a surprise, as the final step is to install custom firmware and load a whole bunch of games on for Blake to play. Here's a quick look of the console now that it's been completed and running custom firmware with a PS5 theme. I'm really proud of this build. It's the first time I've actually made a PSP from scratch. And I really hope that he gets some good use out of it. Here's a quick look at some of the games that I've put on the PSP. And I just couldn't help but take it for a test drive. I'm actually quite envious of this build now, and might end up doing something similar for myself, although maybe not to this extent. And there you have it, our build is complete. So looking back on this process, I definitely learnt a lot in terms of what I'll do in future differently, and understanding exactly what's involved in the process. Let me know in the comments if you have any questions or feedback. I hope you enjoyed this more casual approach, and if you enjoyed this video, please consider leaving a like and subscribing to my channel to stay notified of future releases. Once again, I've been your host Sam, and I'll see you next time on Everything PSP.